Hi everyone, welcome to JavaTechie. In today's video, we'll be diving deep into how to deploy a Spring Boot application on AWS EKS or Elastic Kubernetes Service. Okay, alright. At high level, AWS EKS provides a scalable and managed Kubernetes service and that allowing us to easily deploy, manage and scale containerized applications using Kubernetes. If you are a developer looking to scale your application efficiently, then Kubernetes is the go-to solution. And when you pair it with AWS EKS, the process becomes even more streamlined. But don't worry, if you are new to all of this, we'll break down the steps and by the end of this video, you will have a Spring Boot app up and running on your AWS EKS. Okay, so without any further delay, let's get started. But before we jump into this deployment process, if you are new to Kubernetes and AWS, then I will highly recommend you to check out my playlist on Kubernetes and AWS. In that series, I have provided clear explanation for each and every concept. So without having basic understanding of these two technology, this tutorial may not help you. So feel free to pause this video, take some time to go through this playlist and return to this tutorial when you feel prepared. Okay? Alright. Now let me walk you through the steps of deployment. At very first step, we need to create a Spring Boot project. Next, since our goal is to run this app in a container, let's dockerize the Spring Boot app, or in simple word, let's create a Docker image. Following to that, since we are utilizing AWS as our cloud infrastructure, let's push our image to ECR. ECR stands for Elastic Container Registry. We can keep the image in Docker Hub, but since we are using AWS, let's utilize its services so that we can perform the seamless integration with other AWS services. Okay, fine. Next, once the Docker image is prepared, the next step is to deploy it to the Kubernetes. That's simple, isn't it? Just create the deployment and service object, then just expose it so that it will deploy to the Kubernetes. That is what the simple steps we follow, right? But here we don't want to take the headache of setting up our own Kubernetes environment. Rather, we leverage that using managed Kubernetes service provided by AWS, that is EKS. Okay, so I believe we are clear with the flow. Now it's time to see it in action. So whatever the steps we have discussed, we'll go through step by step. But before we proceed further, you must have these three set up on your machine. First, you should have an AWS account and you need to install the AWS CLI and Kubectl, and you should have Docker up and running on your machine. Okay, don't worry, I will share the link of these installation steps in video description. After successfully installing these mentioned tools or software, we are ready to proceed to the next step in our deployment process. Okay, so the first thing we understand, we need to create a Spring Boot project. So let's go to the IntelliJ IDEA. I have created one small hello world kind of Spring Boot project, it having one endpoint slash greetings, and it will return this particular string. Okay, this is what we want to deploy to the AWS EKS. So if you'll go and check in the pom.xml, we are using the latest version of Spring Boot 3.2.0 and JDK 17, and then we don't have any additional dependency apart from web and Lombok. So we are good with the step 1, that is creating a Spring Boot project. Now next, we need to create a Docker image. So to create the Docker image, we need a file called Docker file. Okay, so first what I'll do, I will just specify the project name. I will just want to generate the jar with my specified name. So I'll just define here final name, then I'll name something like Spring Boot, then just update it. Next, I want to generate the jar first. Then I can give that jar to convert it to the Docker image using Docker file. So first let me run maven install. So we can see here build is succeed. Now if you open the target, you can find the jar name with your specified name here. Okay, that's great. Now let's create the Docker file. So I just need to create the Docker file in the root directory. Just create a file. then just define the attribute here. Let me zoom this for you. So I am using the OpenJDK 17 and I am specifying where is my jar. So my jar name is Spring Boot EKS, correct? So let me copy this name, and also I am exposing the port to 8080, that is what the container run my image, and I am just giving the command to execute my jar. So the jar name is Spring Boot -EKS. Okay, that's it. Now next let's create the Docker image. That is what we have defined in the step 2, right? So just go to the ID. Make sure you should run your Docker desktop on your local machine to create a Docker image. So just go to the terminal. You can define Docker build -t and what is the image name you want to keep. Just enter it. So we got some error. What is the error? Okay. So in the step 2, I mean in the Docker file, we have defined it twice. Let's remove one jar.jar. Now let me rerun it. It will take few seconds to create the image. Yeah, you can see here image is created. Now if you'll check in your Docker images, you must find these images. Better I will directly check in the terminal. Can you check here? If you will scroll up, yeah, here is the image. Also we can see the image here also. Let me filter it. Yeah, can you see here? Spring Boot EKS less than a minute. So we are good with the step 2. Now the next step, we need to push that Docker image which we created to ECR. So ECR stands for Elastic Container Registry. This is one of the service given by AWS to store your images. So in my AWS playlist, I already explained about this ECR, and also we did couple of CI/CD pipeline using ECR. You must need to check the video to get more knowledge on ECR. Okay. So now next step, push Docker image to Elastic Container Registry. So just go to your console, AWS console. If you don't have an account, just create it. Once you have an account, you can search your ECR, Elastic Container Registry. Just go here. Now this is the home page of ECR. You can see the option create a repository. Just click on get started and then make the visibility to private and just give the repository name. I am giving Spring Boot -EKS, same name. Then nothing to change here. Just click on create repository. Yeah, so you can see here the repository is created. Now to this repo we need to push our Docker image. So now we cannot see any images here, right? So to push the Docker image to this ECR, you can find the command handy in this particular page itself. So you just need to execute this command. So first copy this, then go to the terminal, or even you can run it from here. Let me do it here. So nothing, I'm just trying to log into the ECR through the AWS CLI, and this is what the username and password. Just enter it. Yeah, can you see here? Login succeeded. Now what is the next step? Just build your Docker image which we already built. So you can skip this, but if you will build it again, it will pull from your Docker engine. Okay, just run it again. So you can skip this, that is optional. Now what is the next? Just tag the image with the latest. Okay, so just copy this and then let me clear this. Simply execute it. Cool. Now the last step, we need to push it to the ECR. So just copy this particular command and trigger it here. So let's wait it to complete. So this seems succeed. Now let's verify this in our ECR. Just go to the browser, just close it. Now if I'll refresh this, I can see my images here with the tag latest, and these are the images. So I need to copy this particular URI for reference. So just keep this particular URI for your reference. Fine. So we are good with the step 3. So we create a Spring Boot project, we dockerize that image, then we push that image to the ECR. Now the next step, we need to pull the image from ECR and deploy it into the EKS, which is Elastic Kubernetes Service. So it means we need to do the setup of EKS to push the image from ECR. Correct? That is the last step is pending. So first let's do the EKS setup. To do that, first we need to create one cluster in EKS. So let me duplicate this particular page. Now if I will go to the services and if I will filter EKS, you can find here Elastic Kubernetes Service. Just open that. So here you can create the cluster by click on add cluster or create cluster. You can do it from the UI. Okay, but there is also an option you can use the EKS CTL tool to create the cluster and to do the basic setup in your EKS. Okay, so in this tutorial I will not go through the UI steps, rather I will trigger the command using EKS CTL. Basically this EKS CTL is the command line utility for managing your Amazon EKS cluster. It simplifies the process of creating, updating and deleting your EKS cluster with a simple command. So I will prefer to use that. So what I will do, I will open the terminal, then I will trigger the command to just create the cluster using EKS CTL utility. So let me zoom this for you. So the command I want to trigger is the simple one, EKS CTL, create the cluster with this name JT cluster. Then this is what the Kubernetes version I want to use, 1.28, and node type t2.small. That is what the EC2 instance I want to use, and in which region you want to create your cluster, that is US-East-2. That is what the region I am using to create my EKS cluster. Okay, so this is the simple command. So let me change the name of my cluster. We'll give some meaningful name. So I will change it to JavaTechie cluster. Okay, now just enter it. It will take 12 to 15 minutes to create your cluster. Great. So you can see here EKS cluster, JavaTechie and the name of our cluster in this particular region is ready to use. Can you see here? And it almost took 14 minutes. We started at 45 and it completed on 59. Okay, that's fine. Now to verify that the cluster is created, go to the browser and just refresh it. We can see the cluster here, right? Just click on this cluster name. Then you can see here lot of configuration information about your cluster. Okay, since we have created using the command line tool, it created all the required configuration for us. That's fine. Next we need to update our local kubeconfig file so that from our local command it can connect to our this particular cluster. So for that, what you can do, go to the terminal. Let me clear this. Then just update your kubeconfig file with your cluster so that it will load all the necessary configuration required from your local to connect to your EKS. Just enter it. Okay, update the context with this. This is what the cluster, and it update our kubeconfig file. Now since our cluster are up and running, the next step is deploying our application to Kubernetes cluster, which is EKS. So to deploy any application to the Kubernetes, we need two things, deployment object and service object, and these two objects we usually create using the YAML configuration. Okay, in application we specify the configuration to tell to the Kubernetes what is the image you want to deploy to the cluster and which kind of service you want to expose. Okay, so let's define the Kubernetes manifest file, which is nothing service.yml or deploy.yml. So let me go to the project. Then what I'll do, I'll just create a file called k8s.yaml. Then here I just need to define the deployment and service specific configuration. So just add it. This is simple guys. Okay, in my Kubernetes playlist I have explained each and every configuration details. So just have a look. I will share the link in video description. you guys can understand what is the deployment and what is the service object in Kubernetes. So here nothing, I am just telling in the deployment object, this is what my deployment name and this is what my label, and here I am telling the number of pods will be 3. I want to create the 3 pods of my application. So the replica we have specified 3 and the container port is 8080. Now here you need to tell to the Kubernetes which image to run in the EKS cluster. So if you remember, in the steps we have pushed our image to ECR. So you need to give that URI to run or to pull that image in our Kubernetes and run it in the EKS. Okay. So see, it's very simple. We are not using our local Kubernetes. We are using the EKS, which is the Kubernetes instance or services given by AWS. Okay. So it's very simple. Just go to the browser, then just copy the URI. Fine. Then go to your code and tell to the Kubernetes to pull this particular image from the ECR and run it on the EKS cluster. Now if you'll come here, the service I have defined name of my service and the selector label I have specified the same for deployment and service, and then I have specified the port 80, target port 8080, and the service type I am exposing load balancer. You can also try with the node port or external cluster IP, but here I am using the load balancer. Okay, so once you have this file, then you just need to apply this manifest file to initiate the deployment and service object deployment. Okay, the simple steps what you can do. So first let me navigate to this particular directory. This is in CD desktop, JavaTechie code, then I'm inside Spring Boot -EKS. Great. Okay, now if you will do ls, you can see the YML file, right? KTest.yml file. So simply just apply it. Kubectl apply -f. What is the file name you want to apply where it contains the deployment and service object? That is ktest.yml, right? Just apply it. So in few seconds you will see it will start service object and deployment object. Can you see here? It created the deployment and it created the service. Now the number of pods we have defined 3. So to validate that, first let me check kubectl. Let me zoom this for you. Get service. So you can see here, right? My app -services. This is what the service name and type load balancer, and this is what the external IP. Using that we can able to access our application. But before that, let's validate the pods. Kubectl get pods. It should display 3 pods. Great. Can you see here? There are 3 pods and all the status is running. There is no error. Fine. So we are good here. Okay. So now how we can access our application? Let me get the URL, this external IP. So simply let me clear everything. I just need to get the service. So this is what the URL, right? Let me copy this particular URL. Then go to the browser and hit this particular endpoint. It will take few seconds. So finally we can see the 404 API specific error because we have not specified the endpoint URL. So what is that? Greetings. That is what we have defined, right? So if you will go to the main class, the URL is /greetings. Just paste it here, enter it. Can you see here the output? Welcome to JavaTechie, and your app is deployed to the AWS EKS. That is what we have just returning from our endpoint. Now if you will do validate again, this is what the cluster, and if you will filter here, since we have exposed our service as a load balancer, you can find the load balancer instance which is created by this ekctl command. Can you see here? This is what the service we are exposing, right? So AWS created the load balancer for it, And also if you'll check the EC2 instance, the instance is running. That is what we have defined, right? While creating the EKS cluster, we have specified that particular command to use the EC2 instance of t2.small. That is what the instance is running here. So if you'll see here, these are the instance. So that's fine. We are not going to focus on this configuration. When we will try with the UI, that time I will explain what all basic configuration is required to create one EC2 instance. Okay, so we are good. We are successfully deployed our application to AWS EKS. EKS is nothing, managed Kubernetes service running on AWS itself. Okay, that is the simple step. Now the last step, what you need to do, you need to tear down your cluster, or you need to delete your cluster, because this will charge something. I mean, a big number it will charge. So it's better if you are using it for the learning purpose. Once you tested your scenario, if things are working, it's good to delete the cluster. So the command is very simple. Let me delete the cluster. We verified with this particular external IP, we are able to access the endpoint, right? So to do that, to delete the cluster, what I can do, kubectl delete cluster, name of your cluster, what is that? JavaTechie hyphen cluster. Just enter it. Again it will take 5 to 7 minutes to delete your cluster. What is that? The server does not have a resource type cluster. Okay, so yeah, the mistake is I am running it using the kubectl, but that is what we need to use, the EKSCTL. Okay, EKSCTL delete cluster JavaTechie. So it initiates the request to delete the cluster. So again it will take few seconds. So we are good, I believe. Okay, so this is how we can deploy our application to AWS EKS. So all the required resource what we have discussed here, I'll share in the video description. Also I will share link of my Medium blog where you can find each and every step. Okay, do let me know in a comment section if you guys have any doubts. That's all about this particular video, guys. Thanks for watching this video. Meet you soon with a new concept.